What is gluten-free baking? Gluten-free baking means baked goods made without wheat or any other gluten-containing grain. Consumers who suffer from celiac disease, gluten allergies, or experience gluten intolerances can safely consume gluten-free bread, gluten-free cakes, and many other gluten-free bakery products. The term gluten-free is defined to mean that a food bearing this claim in its labeling does not contain any one of the following: an ingredient that is a prohibited grain, an ingredient that is derived from a prohibited grain and that has not been processed to remove gluten, an ingredient that is derived from a prohibited grain and that has been processed to remove gluten, if the use of that ingredient results in the presence of 20 parts per million, ppm, or more gluten in the food, or 20 ppm or more gluten, according to the FDA. What's not gluten-free? Here's a list of grains to leave out of gluten-free products: wheat, Triticum aestivum or Triticum durum; flour, white or wholemeal; ancient wheats like einkorn, spelt, emmer, spelt, and kamut; barley, meaning any species belonging to the genus Hordeum; rye, meaning any species belonging to the genus Sakali; crossbred hybrids of wheat, rye, or barley, for example, Tree T. Cali, which is a cross between wheat and rye. Here are some common gluten-free flour categories: grains, roots, and tubers, like rice flour, pre-gelatinized rice flour, potato flour, oat flour, corn flour, sorghum flour, brown rice flour, and cassava, tapioca, flour. Pseudo-cereals, which includes quinoa flour and amaranth flour. Legumes and pulses, which includes garbanzo bean flour and soybean flour. Other gluten-free flours include coconut flour, flaxseed flour, and almond flour. Processing comparison. So, what's the difference in processing between gluten-containing and gluten-free baked foods? Let's take a look at standard white bread versus gluten-free bread. Standard white bread contains wheat flour, water, salt, fat, yeast, and dough conditioners. During processing, it is mixed to full gluten development. Then comes time for panning. After that, the bread is proofed at 104 degrees Fahrenheit, or 40 degrees Celsius, and 80% relative humidity. Finally, it is baked. On the other hand, gluten-free bread contains gluten-free flours, water, salt, hydrocolloids, yeast, dough conditioners, and enzymes. During processing, it is mixed enough to incorporate and hydrate solids to obtain target batter viscosity. While depositing, the dough has a batter consistency. Gluten-free bread is also proofed at 104 degrees Fahrenheit, or 40 degrees Celsius, and 80% relative humidity before being baked. During baking, it is usually baked at a lower temperature for a longer time to remove the large amount of water usually found in gluten-free bread. Cooling times are 2 to 3 times longer than regular bread. Why add protein in gluten-free baking? When removing gluten-forming proteins, such as glutenins and gliadins, it is mandatory to incorporate other sources of protein to replace some of the functions of gluten, namely formation of a cohesive polymeric network, necessary for gas retention, crumb formation and structure setting, gelling, both cold and hot, water binding, viscoelasticity. Plant-based proteins, natural fibers, and gums are capable of forming strong gels, binding water, emulsifying and stabilizing foams. Common commercial sources of gluten-free protein include egg solids, dairy/whey, soy, rice, and pea protein. What type of starch is best for a gluten-free formula? Cornstarch is the most widely used, commercially available gluten-free food starch, followed by rice, tapioca, cassava, and potato starch. The unique properties and structure of each starch source, i.e. granule size, swelling temperature, ratio of amylose versus amylopectin, create different effects within a formula. It is very important to discern between native and modified, chemically or physically modified, starches. Native starch is the pure, extracted starch which requires heat to activate its gelling properties. Modified starches have undergone further processing to alter the performance. Common physical modification processes include pre-gelatinization, cold swelling, annealing, and high shear milling, which can improve the viscosity and stability of the starch in the dough system. Modified starches are especially useful in gluten-free baking. Want to learn more about gluten-free baking and formulation, as well as get the answers to common questions about baking gluten-free? Download the gluten-free problem-solving baker paper on the Baker Academy via the link in the description below. Learn more about all things baking by signing up for our newsletter. Until next time, bakers. At BAKERpedia, we're here on a need-to-know basis.